Thank you for purchasing my next DVD, all about taking it back. I just wanted to say a few words about why I think this information is so important and so relevant. I think it's probably the most important aspect of our sport, being able to get behind someone. It conveys probably the most dominance that you can convey in the context of a match, aside from submitting someone. A lot of submission holds are very complicated. To get somebody to be proficient enough to submit somebody with, an armbar, for example, or something like an inverted heel hook, it takes a long time. Okay, especially to be able to do it against another person who, knows how to defend those things. It can be very difficult. But you take someone and put them on somebody's back that's much more skilled than them. There's still a pretty good chance that person gets submitted. The rear naked choke, which is probably the most common strangle from the back, is probably one of the simplest. It's one of the first ones that you learn. It's one of the easiest to complete, okay, even against a skilled opponent. And it goes very much into the mindset of trying to establish situations that are unfair to the opponent, okay? We talk about having a fair fight, like it couldn't be anything, kind of farther from the point. We actually want to make the fight as unfair as we possibly can. And the best way to do that in many cases is to get to your opponent's back. I think that another thing that I've found over the years in my own teaching, I used to teach a college program. And when I taught the college program, I thought to myself, I was really excited about it. I wanted to introduce these guys to the idea of jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of brand new people that had never done it before. And I wanted to introduce jiu-jitsu to these people. So I'm showing them all different kinds of movements. I'd show, a Kimura one day, and then a back take the next day, and the next day a Darce choke. And, I tried my best to show them like all aspects of the sport, and I thought that was really cool. And I'm sure it was a great experience for them. But over the years, what I realized was it became difficult for them to use the things that they knew in a constructive fashion in the context of a fight or a match or even a training session, because it wasn't really systematized. It's just kind of one technique after another. Getting behind somebody is such a simple system to teach that I think it's one of the best ways to introduce beginners to the sport. I think that over the years, what I decided to do instead, I spent semesters doing this. I basically, from every position in the sport, taught them how to get behind somebody and how to strangle from there. And I found that to be much more productive and much more useful in the context of a fight. It's just such a simple thing. It's like, oh man, how can I get behind this person? And if you're asking yourself that question from basically every position in the sport, all right, it's going to become something that you can use very, very quickly. So yeah, for the purposes of teaching, for the purposes of effectiveness, for the purposes of winning fights, guys, if you're getting started in this and you're having mixed results in competition, probably, I get this question all the time by students of mine, and they'll say, oh man, what should I work on? This, that, and the other thing. I want to get good at competition. I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. I would say for many of the years of the early part of your career, I think if you just focus on taking the back, that will take you very, very far. Of course, you still learn other aspects of the sport, but getting to the back from any given position your goal, it's never going to fail you, especially in your early years in the sport. It's never going to fail you because in competition, whether it's a points tournament or submission only tournament, in a points tournament, I'm scoring 4 points, 3 points, whatever the case may be. In a sub only tournament, I'm conveying dominance. I'm getting behind somebody. They're not able to do anything to me, and I'm able to do submissions to them. So I think it's a very winning strategy, especially in the early part of your career, to just focus on that. So I think for many reasons, this is probably one of the most important parts of our sport, and hopefully I'm able to contribute, to your progression in some way with this. And hopefully you guys enjoy some of the things that you see today. Okay, let's just establish a brief overview of kind of where I want your head to be at when you're studying these techniques in your approach, trying to get two training partners back. There's kind of 4 core positions that I want you to be focused on getting to at any given point in time in a match that's going to quickly get you to your training partners back. The first is a turtle situation. Anytime you can get your training partner in situations where they're on their knees and elbows, okay, you're very close to taking your training partners back. Okay, the next 4-point position, anytime you can get your training partner down onto their hands and their feet, okay, again, very close to taking your training partners back. Okay, rear body lock, anytime you get somebody behind you, hugging the waist, okay, this is another situation where you're very, very close to taking your training partners back. And then finally, when you have a front headlock situation around the head and the arm, okay, this is also going to be, I probably should have used an uke for this one. This would have been good. You're a good one. But they'll get the picture. They're going to see this in a minute anyway. But you guys get the idea. Those 4 core positions are going to be where most of the actual back taking happens, where we score points, right? Where we get our 2 hooks in, where we get our figure 4, whatever the case may be. So those are the places that I want you to focus on getting to as often as possible. And I try to structure this DVD so you have as many ways as possible once you get to those positions to actually physically take the back, okay? But then the rest of it's all like, how do we get there, right? So really focus on how to get to those 4 positions, and you'll basically always have access to your training partner's back, okay? I think that'll be immensely helpful, especially to the beginner student in terms of trying to figure out like, oh man, how am I actually going to make this happen, okay? When you have a goal in mind, a place that you want your training partner to be, it's much easier, even without my advice, even without my coaching, without any of the techniques that you guys are going to see in this DVD, to come up with creative ways to get to these positions, okay? So let those be your, let that kind of be your guiding light, let that be your goal, and I think you guys are going to take the back way more often. Okay, so now we're going to be in a situation where our training partner ends up in turtle situation, elbows and knees on the floor. Okay, this is one of our mainstay positions when we're talking about back taking that you're going to find yourself getting to all the time. So no matter how long the combination chain is from the first point of which you start, whether it's a takedown or whether it's a submission hold or whatever the case may be, to the point of which you've actually got behind your training partner ready to strangle them, okay, turtle position is likely to be seen. Okay, it's one of the most likely situations that you'll end up in before you end up completely on your training partner's back, hooks in, ready to rear naked choke or whatever the case may be, okay? When you get an opportunity to be in this position, and we'll talk about other positions as well, we'll lightly touch on them a little bit during this part, we look to control our training partner in 2 main ways. There are other ways as well we'll probably address, but probably the 2 that I think are very important to distinguish and to understand why you would or wouldn't use these methods are probably the rear body lock, okay, and the seatbelt grip, okay? So whether I have my hands locked around my training partner underneath the shoulders, or whether I have a seatbelt around one of my training partner's shoulders, okay? So only one shoulder is contained in the lock, the other is on the outside, okay? So we're going to talk about the main differences between these 2 before we talk about the actual back takes, because I think it's very important for your understanding of control, okay? Now, what does the seatbelt grip offer me? It's probably the most common grip you see when somebody gets behind somebody in turtle position. What does it offer me that the grip where I go underneath both shoulders doesn't offer me? Okay, well, the seatbelt grip makes it way easier for me to follow the opponent with my hips in a way that immobilizes the shoulders. Okay, what do I mean by that? Okay, if my training partner turns towards me, that doesn't make a difference, turn towards me or away, all right, I can stay behind my training partner. Even if I don't move very well to follow him, when he tries to turn his shoulders, it's difficult. My arms are restricting the motion of this shoulder inside my chest. So he can't pull his elbow across the center line. So even if I'm a little slow, keep turning, I can eventually shovel myself back underneath my training partner and take the back as my training partner is trying to evade. Let's pull ourselves back to this position. Okay. Let's say, for example, he turned the other direction. Same sort of thing. Even as I kind of stay put, go ahead, keep turning. There's a certain restriction of motion that my training partner has that he's limited to while I control one of the shoulders here. It stops him from being able to rotate to some degree inside my chest to be able to escape. And again, even if I'm a little late, I can get back behind my training partner again. Okay? Contrast that with reaching underneath my training partner's 2 shoulders. Doesn't mean I can't follow somebody. I can absolutely follow somebody effectively from here. And a lot of that has to do with my hip position, and we'll talk about that later. All right, but as my training partner goes to roll or whatever the case may be, If I'm a little slow, keep turning, keep turning, keep turning, keep turning. The shoulders and elbows start cutting in, and he's able to face me in various positions. So if I don't get my hooks in, and I'm a little slow at following him with the hips, I don't control his turn. If he turned the other way, the same thing is true. I stay put and he keeps turning, he can eventually face me. Okay, now I'm obviously being a little bit dramatic here. All right, but nonetheless, it's important to understand, okay? One of those grips controls how well your training partner's shoulders can turn and your ability to stay behind your training partner. So that might be why you would select, the seatbelt over just a tight waist behind your training partner. Doesn't mean the tight waist doesn't have value, okay? Why might you when you look at things that way, you go, well, what's the point? Why would I lock my hands underneath my training partner's chest then? Why underneath both shoulders? Why would we even ever go to that grip if the seatbelt is so good at stopping my training partner from turning? Okay? Well, the main reason would be in situations where my training partner pops up, into a 4-point situation. When this position has changed and we're no longer in turtle, that would be when you're most likely to change your grip. We might mention that again later on, just for the sake of kind of clarifying when we're getting to that position. But if I keep a seatbelt here, I tend to fall off of the top of my training partner. All right, as I'm trying to take the back. It's very hard for me to stay with him. Okay? Whereas when I lock hands around my training partner's chest, like so, underneath both shoulders, he can walk back, shake me all he wants, and I can do a pretty good job of holding on to this guy. Okay, he's not going anywhere. Okay, even though, when we do finally get to the mat, he might be able to turn inside my lock a little bit more effectively. Okay, so keep that in mind, from turtle position to 4-point, because that position can change rapidly, and we'll address that at some point. Okay, so let's look at this again. Training partners in turtle situation, right? Again, we said seatbelt helps us control our training partner's shoulders as he goes to turn here, either direction. I have good control. Doesn't mean it's impossible. Just keep sliding your hips out, hips out, hips out. If I'm completely negligent, he'll get out. But it's much more difficult per se than if I just have hands around my training partner's waist. Okay, you can see he can always turn inside my hands. Okay, so keep this in mind when we're choosing whether or not to go from seatbelt, whether or not to go for a seatbelt or whether or not to go for a tight waist. Okay, now that we understand a little bit about the seatbelt position, our seatbelt grip, we can actually use that grip to elicit a roll on the part of our training partner. Okay, and why is that important? Okay, we're going to address a couple different things here. My training partner's knees and elbows down on the mat. Well, number one, the control grip that we have can be used to physically get better control with our legs. So the control grip we have with our arms facilitates control with our legs, and that's what we're looking for. Okay, so it starts out with some control and then hopefully ends with even more. Okay. So it's like a pathway to get there. And I don't have to make any major adjustments in grip. I can just keep that seatbelt. So that's what's great about this movement. Another thing to start to understand, like what we're actually trying to do when our training partner gets into a turtle situation here. In a perfect world, I would love to just step inside my training partner's hips. And now I have the control on the back that I'm looking for. But my training partner's smart. He's going to do everything he can to keep his knees, elbows together, all these sorts of things. Okay, if I have a good defensive opponent and he knows what's going on here, okay, he knows that I'm trying to get feet inside and control my training partner's hips and get control with my legs. See, he rarely wants it to happen. Control of the upper body is almost always much more accessible. No matter how tight he tries to stay, especially no gi, it's pretty easy for me to slide my hands in here and get that seatbelt. Okay, you might have already had the grip when you got there, but regardless, not that difficult to get. Getting feet inside, on the other hand, when he stays, this is pretty difficult to do. We're going to talk about some methods that might make that easier, but it's tough. So one of the ways to make it easier for us to get feet inside is to remove the wedge that is the mat that allows my training partner to hide this open space, okay, that I want to put hooks in front of my training partner's hips. Okay, if my training partner, for example, was seated in front of me in the same position, so same structure, okay? Right. So he has his elbows and his knees together in the same structure. Okay. Even if he tried to keep his knees and elbows together now, go ahead. Right. When I go to try to place hooks in, it's way harder for him to stop me because there's a big open gap in front of my training partner instead of a wall or a floor. Okay. So it makes my job considerably easier when I want to try to take my training partners back. Nobody lets you put them in this position though. So he goes to his knees. If I just try to yank Chris off of the floor, pull him into this, it's very difficult to do, no gi. Sometimes in the gi, you can use the lapels to do something like that. You might be able to open up some space between the knees and elbows. That's hard to do no gi if you're around the same size as your opponent. So we're going to back up a little bit just so we have room to do this roll, okay? Instead, I'm going to make my training partner roll forward with the pressure of my shoulder to pull him into a position where now he's in that seated place where there's a gap, there's no longer a floor between us that allows me to start placing hooks in at any given point in time. Okay? So let's look at this again. Training partner's in turtle position. Everything is boxed out. There's a floor in the way that makes it even harder for me to insert feet. But I've got my seatbelt. In these situations, I'm going to take my shoulder, this is a critical detail of the move, and I'm going to adjust it so it's in the back of my training partner's skull, kind of like where that, it's called the occipital protuberance. It's like this little bone that sticks out. Some people's are really prominent and they look like a triceratops or something from behind. All right, it's got like a huge bump. Other people, it's a little smoother. You know, Chris doesn't have a very prominent one, but there's a little bone right here. I would say just about there is where I typically want my shoulder. If you go too far, your shoulder slips off, and then you create a situation where the head can pop out, right? We don't want that. So I put my shoulder right about there, okay? Now, what am I doing with that shoulder? I'm trying to make it so my training partner has to go chin to chest and eventually perform a roll, okay? So I take my training partner's head and I start turning it, okay, right? And my training partner is going to do a shoulder roll over this side, okay? In order to get the maximum amount of weight and pressure to make this happen, I don't stay close to the opponent. When I stay close to him and I kind of just try to turn, it's difficult to really force my training partner into a roll, okay? So what I'm going to do is walk my feet away from him, and even just taking my knees off the ground already puts all the weight here on the back of my training partner's neck. At this point, unless he's superhuman, his forehead would be touching the ground. All right, here, if he wants to lift his head up, go ahead. He can fight. Here, there's no way. Okay? So get your knees off the floor before you perform this move so you have enough weight to force the head down to the ground. Okay? Now, this is not an explosive movement. I don't have to jump off the floor to force my training partner to roll. In fact, I would argue that that's a little bit dangerous. Okay? From here, I just walk in a circle around the opponent until the pressure forces my training partner to roll. Okay? Now, one thing that's very important when you do this, and this is important with all back taking, is to always try to keep your training partner's hips between the space of your knees. All right? The whole time you're in positions where you're taking your training partner's back, do your best to keep your training partner's hips between the knees. Why? If I go to do this move and I'm naive, I can successfully get him to roll through, but he will hop to either side of my body and begin the process of turning towards me. Go ahead. Go back. This can happen on the other side as well. Okay. Here. Okay. You can start sliding his elbow in and he starts to get out. Again, I'm being a little dramatic. Obviously, it's going to be more of a fight than that. Okay. But for sure, if I don't get my hips behind this guy, I'm going to be in trouble and I'm going to turn this into an unnecessary scramble. I should have full control over the situation for the most part throughout this entire movement. Okay? So, right here, shoulder to the back of the neck, we walk, walk, walk. And there's a critical point where I look up at the ceiling and my hips point towards the ceiling. Now, I'm monitoring my training partner. As his hips come down, okay, hold on. As his hips come down, I'm going to look to make sure my knees match up. So if I do this and I stay put, go ahead, and the hips come down over here, I'm screwed, okay? I start seeing the hips come down, and I just put my knees in behind. One of the things you can do to help control where the hips land is you can use this elbow in the seatbelt to monitor your training partner's hips. Instead of just allowing the hips to go wherever they want. So I have relatively loose seatbelt. You could hop all the way over here if you want to. Go ahead. Hop like across the body. Go back. If I use this elbow to pinch in on my training partner's hips, hop across the body. He can't do it. It limits. He can still hop across the body a little bit. Go ahead. But he can't land where he landed previously. Okay? So I pinch in with this elbow. Make sure I limit it. I know where his hip is in space. Go ahead. Push into my elbow. Like you're going to try to hop across. And now my knee can match up to that elbow. And even if I haven't gotten hooks in yet, I know I'm still behind this guy. I know he's not just going to slip out. Okay, I could always get hooks in at a later date. Now from here, for the time being, we'll just place our 2 hooks in. We'll talk about more elaborate methods from crab ride situation, which is kind of what you land in there, as to how you to take your training partners back in other clips. Okay, but for the time being, that's pretty much what we're looking at. Okay, we roll our training partner forward, exposing the space between the knees and the elbows to eventually place hook in. Again, being very careful that our knees match up with the training partner's hips. I'll just do it one more time, kind of full speed. Right there, my knees right between my training partner's hips. And of course, now he can start to turn and go wherever, and I'll start placing hooks in, etc. Okay, to follow my training partner. All right, so we spent a little bit of time learning about the seatbelt and how we can roll with our training partner or force our training partner to roll with the seatbelt. Can we do this with other grips? Okay, from a turtle situation? Yes. Okay, that same sort of tight waist or rear body lock sort of situation, with a minor adjustment, we can kind of manipulate our training partner to better expose them to hooks. Once again, if my training partner's knees and elbows are on the floor, okay, our big problem here is I'd love to get my feet inside, okay, but there's a lot of traffic here, okay? A lot of things blocking my way. It's significantly easier when my training partner takes a seat on the floor. Okay, when my training partner takes a seat on the floor, there's a much bigger gap. Yes, he can still use his hands. Yes, he can still use his legs to defend. Okay, but now there's no wall in the way. All right, unlike previously where I had to dig in this space, I can loop my leg in all different places, up, down, and around my training partner's arms, all right, to threaten my training partner. Makes my job way easier when it goes to actually putting legs around this guy. Okay, now previously we used that seatbelt to roll him through. This time we're going to be in this tight waist position. Okay. Now, no matter what, there's a bit of a degree of danger associated with like reaching around your training partner in various ways because our training partner can elicit a roll. We'll talk about that later. One of the ways that you can reduce his ability to do that in most situations is to stay relatively behind him, because no matter where he rolls, it's much easier to follow, whether you have the seatbelt or the chest lock. Okay. So the first method we'll look at as far as chest lock rolling will involve staying relatively behind my training partner. It's probably the safest way to go about doing things because it's hard for my training partner to elicit a roll. Okay. Or I shouldn't even say hard. If he does elicit a roll, he helps me. Okay. So I stay relatively behind my training partner and my hands move up to my training partner's shoulders and lock underneath his jaw. So normally if I was just hugging around my training partner's waist, I'd be about here. Okay. The problem with doing that when we're down in turtle is at any given point in time, my training partner can start to pop up. Okay. Go back down. And that's no good for me. Okay. If my training partner tries to do the same thing, even when my hands are just locked here, it's much more difficult and laborious. He can do it. Don't get me wrong. Okay. Chris isn't that weak that he can't like get up from this position, but it's much more difficult. The more weight I put in a forward direction, the harder it will be for my training partner to start bringing his head and shoulders up. Okay. So as I slide those grips up to the shoulders and lock and take my head and place it next to my opponent's head, as he goes to try to get up, the only thing he can realistically do is get his butt off the ground because I'm taking weight off of the hips and transferring it to the front. Pop up. Okay. That's where this roll is going to start to come in. He doesn't have to elicit the roll. He doesn't have to be the one that gets up. If he does, no problem. We're still going to be able to go with this guy. Okay? So whether he initiates it or I initiate it, we're going to get this guy to roll. Okay? It doesn't protect him to go to 4-point here because unlike the seatbelt, go ahead, where I slide off my training partner, when I have this chest lock, I don't slide nearly as much. I can hang on pretty well to this guy. Okay, let's go back. Like I mentioned before, I really want to be behind his hips for this one. So I'm going to have a knee across my training partner.
Okay, we'll start with me initiating this move. I put my head down next to his, and I just swing my legs forward and bring my training partner to the floor. This doesn't have to be done, again, super violently, and I wouldn't recommend it to be done violently. You could potentially spike your own head on the floor, land on your training partner in awkward ways. Doesn't need to be done that way. You can literally do this move, do a headstand on your training partner, and the pendulum action of your legs swinging down will take your training partner through no problem. This isn't something that I have to perform a front tuck over my training partner. Yeah, I get it. It looks cool. You're excited. Okay. But calm down. All right. It doesn't have to be done quite that way. Just a nice light roll over your training partner is just fine. But even if you want to slow it down the way that I did, it's gonna work out perfectly fine. Just make sure we're tucking. We're on the top part of our head, balancing and rolling through. Again, staying parallel to our training partner as much as possible for this roll. We're here. Head goes down. We pull our training partner through. Sometimes this move can fail, especially when you've got a bigger, stronger opponent. Okay, so be aware of that. Be careful with that. But what I will say is I can often recover from the position, even if the move fails. So now that may just be because I'm a little bit more athletic, but hopefully you can too. All right, we get in this position. I tuck the head down. Now Chris is going to try to stand his ground. And I get into this position. No problem. There's two ways to try to fix this. Okay? One is I allow my hips to touch the floor and I swing my hips back up on top of my training partner. And I get back behind. That's one way. The other way is I can push off of the mat, elevate my hips, and walk back towards my training partner. And get myself in this position. Okay? So if you ever try to perform this roll and things don't work out, the guy doesn't move, usually it's because your hands are a little too loose. If that happens, we either pop our hips back and walk, okay? Or we just swing our legs back over our training partner in a pendulum action. I'll do those two one more time, okay? Assuming it doesn't work, I can either swing, come back up on top of my training partner, or hips up, just walk right on my head and get back to the original position, okay? That'll save you a lot of heartache for when you go to try to do this. You're much bigger training partners and you have trouble. Let's do it one more time. We'll do the actual move that we're looking for here. Hips are relatively behind, head goes down. Just roll on through, okay? Once again, we'll talk about more complex sequences of getting hooks in. We'll just assume that you're going to put feet on the inside right away, okay? This one, unlike the seatbelt roll, it's a little easier and more natural for your training partner to end up between your knees. It's harder, unless you really suck, I guess, for your training partner to end up on either side, because you start with your knees behind your training partner's hips. But as always, just in case, your training partner's smart and tries to swing his hips from side to side or something like that, just be ready. Wherever his hips goes, your knees follow. If you see his hips move a different direction, don't let them go there without your knees, okay? Your knees have to stay underneath this guy. Okay, now, there's one additional way to do this move. Little riskier, because you come out in a perpendicular direction. Okay? Previously, I stayed behind the guy. So if he rolls from side to side, I can follow pretty well. When I get perpendicular and somebody rolls, I might not be able to follow so well. Okay, there's some makikomi roll danger, right, in these sorts of situations. Okay? So, to the best of our ability, when we go to do a move like this, okay, I want to put heavy pressure towards my training partner's upper body. And I'm not saying you have to rush this, but I don't hang out in a perpendicular position for long periods of time. I'm going to lock up. I'm going to put my head where it needs to go. And I'm going to walk just like the last move. Okay, and roll my training partner into position. Right, the same way that we did with the seatbelt grip. Okay, it won't be as strong in terms of attacking your training partner's neck and getting him to crunch in, but you'd be surprised. It's pretty effective. I use it against much heavier opponents. It works quite well. And the other unique thing about this particular movement is that it works pretty well from a 4-point position as well. It would be rare if somebody was already in a 4-point position and you locked up around their shoulders and just jumped and did a forward roll over your training partner's head. I do a lot of crazy things. That seems even too crazy for me. Okay. I don't know about you guys. That feels like a big risk. Feels like you could slip off of your training partner, smash your head on the floor, etc. Okay. So it might even be easier from this position to do this secondary variation. I would walk, hips face the ceiling, and we roll our training partner through. Okay. Same thing's true. Turtle situation. I lock up, head goes in. That head coming across your training partner, like chin right in your training partner's trap. It's so important. It puts the weight in the right place. It's kind of like your head position is doing what your shoulder used to do. Your shoulder used to crunch on the back of this guy's head. Now it's like your head. You do have a little bit of shoulder on the back of the head here for sure, but it's almost like your head and neck put him in that position. And now my hips open up. That's an easy pull. Put my training partner into this position. Once again, huge advantage of this one over the seatbelt grip is, in the seatbelt grip, if I'm doing this move, my training partner quickly pops up the 4-point. I'm kind of screwed here. Okay, let's go back. Okay, if he quickly pops up to 4-point now, no problem. We're in good position, ready to throw hooks in, following our training partner. Again, monitoring my training partner's hips with my knees, okay? For variations on that chest lock roll. All right, so now we're going to take a look at tilting our training partner to access the legs. Now, this is something that's done in the sport of wrestling to score what they would refer to as back points, okay? As the back becomes exposed to the floor, you're not quite pinned. They start like a count, right? And then they score various amounts of points depending upon how long you can kind of keep that your opponent in that position, right? In our sport, we don't have back points, at least not in that sense. We do when we actually take the back. So our objective is a little bit different. However, some of the methods that we use to get there are somewhat similar, okay? So we can utilize the methods of tilting from a 2-on-1 situation to get access to my training partner's back. It's, again, the same type of procedure where it's like my training partner's knees and elbows are on the floor. I'm going to have a hard time getting hooks in most of the time on a tough opponent. So we try to do things to expose my training partner's chest to the ceiling, or at least, forward facing if it's not to the ceiling, right? But we take it off of the floor, so now it's easier to place hooks in, okay? When we start this 2-on-1 action, I'll just get it artificially, and then I'll talk about like potential ways that maybe I could start setting this up, okay? So for the time being, I'll just get a hold of my training partner's wrist, and then I'll grab the outside of the elbow like so. There's 2 ways in general that we would usually see 2-on-1s in this situation. One would be my 2 hands controlling my training partner's wrist like so. And the other would be a grip on the outside of my training partner's elbow, either with his elbow away or potentially pinned to his chest. Okay, probably pinned to the chest is a little bit better. There's a lot less room for error in terms of your training partner being able to break the grip, etc. Okay, so the wrist kind of goes to the far hip, and we hug that elbow there. Okay, if it's just a 2-on-1 here, same thing. It could be away from my training partner. It could be closer to my training partner, probably closer being better. I have a less of an ability with this 2-on-1 to control this elbow. Start flaring that elbow and trying to pull your arm out. You see how that can start to get exposed. When I have this 2-on-1, that's much more difficult to do. So I tend to prefer this one. I also think this one tends to be a little bit easier to access, and we'll talk about the setup involved in that later. Okay, so we get our 2-on-1. However we do it, both of them will work for the tilt. Okay, and now we're going to place a wedge between my training partner's knee and elbow. Okay, technically speaking, the elbow will be up here. Okay, it won't be down on the mat anymore. All right, but normally that's where it would be. And when we start to open up our training partner to try to throw a hook in, it will be between the knee and the elbow. Initially, it'll just be in front of the elbow and in front of the knee. Okay, our secondary leg is somewhat important in this process as well. Okay, I'm going to show you guys a look from behind. You can kind of see what's going on here. Okay, I got my knee inside, and now you're going to see kind of one of 2 things happening here. Okay, or actually, there's kind of like 3 things we could do. Okay, one would be to step between my training partner's legs. Some people get a little uncomfortable with this. You're probably pretty safe from a 2-on-1, but it does offer some degree of ability for your training partner to roll through your legs. Go ahead and get a hold of the leg. potentially leg attack me. Let's go back. Okay, so some people are a little uncomfortable with that. Again, you're reducing most of the danger by having a 2-on-1. So I really wouldn't worry about that too much in this specific instance, but yeah, worth mentioning. Another good place, stepping on the Achilles tendon. Sometimes this can be difficult with an opponent who's sitting back onto his heels. So it's not always available to you, okay? The last method, maybe, I don't know if I want to say least desirable, but maybe least initially controlling, is to just try to get your other knee as much behind the hamstring as possible. If you could get it on top of the calf muscle, awesome. Okay, but if you can just get it pinched so your two knees are around this knee, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. What we're looking to do is when we do ultimately tilt our training partner, we're looking to pinch our training partner's knee like chopsticks here, okay, just holding it together so that when he tries to create a connection between knee and elbow, go ahead, knee and elbow, that would normally box me out of getting a hook, he can't really effectively do it. And that foot will always find its way on the inside, and I can begin the procedure of getting to my training partner's back and placing a secondary hook in, okay? So once again, let's turn to that side, talk about foot position. Okay, the first method, stepping into this ankle, the advantage of this method is that I can start pulling my training partner's leg open and I get some control over the foot now. So when he tries to go knee to chest, it's even more difficult than when I'm here. Here, if he tries to pommel his foot to the inside, you see how you can break through the position. Okay, like I said, the great vulnerability, go ahead, maneuver into a leg locking situation, is that potentially we offer our training partner a leg lock here. If you're good at the position and you recognize the danger, you'll probably be okay, especially if you're back heeling well, okay? And try to feed to the leg lock. It's a difficult thing, okay? Just focus quickly on getting this foot inside. Once this foot's inside and he tries to reach for your leg, now it doesn't really mean anything, okay? If I hang out here for long periods of time, yeah, he might eventually maneuver into a leg lock. But if you do a good job of quickly putting this foot over your training partner's knee, now we don't have to worry about any of that. Now there is no leg lock, at least with this leg, right? Okay, let's go back up. Back to your knees. Okay, and of course, I mentioned before, stepping on the Achilles tendon. This method has the advantage of opening and controlling your training partner's legs. So it keeps the leg extended, whereas previously, this keeps the leg somewhat short. Okay, this keeps the leg long and keeps the knee far away from the chest. Let's look at this. Okay, and the knee is very far away from my training partner's chest. Okay, so when my training partner goes to try to block, even if my foot wasn't in the right place, it's very difficult for him to do. So we can place this foot on the inside. So let's look at this again. Okay, move as a whole. Okay, we want to tilt our training partner. We start playing around with these 2-on-1s. Okay, I put my knee in front, my other knee behind, and I tilt my training partner on the mat. Now it's called a tilt, not a roll. I'm not going to take my training partner off in this direction. If I make it a complete roll, it's very hard to keep their back, and he'll get his back to the mat. Let's go back. You do basically what would amount to a quarter turn on your training partner. So whatever method you use, again, 2-on-1, we do about a quarter turn. Half turn would be chest facing the ceiling. This is too far. Now we can hop to the other side. Of course, any further than that is even worse. Okay? So we do about a quarter turn and we want to keep him here. If he defensively tries to hop, go ahead. I put my chest and head facing this direction. I don't allow myself to look at the ceiling. That's what's going to let him hop to that other side. Go back. So we've got this tilt. We keep him on this side, and then we focus on getting our first leg inside. From here, we begin climbing the shoulders, and we'll place our second hook in. Again, we'll have a separate section where we talk about how to beat our training partner's defenses from that position when he tries to block the second hook. Okay? So once again, we establish this 2-on-1. Okay? This time, let's do it with a little bit more of an elaborate setup. What's a good place to get a hold of a 2-on-1? Well, you could just try to fish inside and just get two hands on a wrist. It's kind of hard to do, though. You go to try to do this, he's going to fight with his other hand, right? Makes it challenging. One of my favorite times to get 2-on-1s is when a guy tries to spring up with extended arms, okay? As the arms extend, weight comes off of the hands and onto the lower body. Whenever this happens, there's often opportunities to take arms and pin them in towards the chest, okay? So my training partner goes to pop up. I just put my hand a little lower on my training partner's arm, okay? It doesn't have to be perfectly down by the hand, okay? Somewhere about mid-forearm. And now I'm going to pull in towards the body, and I sweep the hand right to my opposite hand, and then control this 2-on-1. So let's go starting on the elbows. He starts popping up. I just cover that wrist and hug it in tight. I could be in a seatbelt position. I come here. I could be in 2 hands underneath the shoulders, and I come here. I basically go with the flow. As my training partner tries to lean back, I go with him. I don't want to put additional weight on his hands if I want to sweep his hands to his midsection. If I lean forward, try to get up on your hands, now there's weight on the hands. I can't pull them. Okay, so let's go back. As he gets up, I lean back. I make it easier for him to get up initially, and then I hug that on. Now we're ready to go into our tilt. Okay? From our tilt, we get our hook in, we get our second hook in. Okay? Look at the other side. Good. Turn. We're playing around. Okay? Here, I feel my training partner pop up. I lean back, and I pull, okay? Either at the elbow or mid-forearm and sweep, all right? Both of those work pretty well. Pop back up. The bicep, go ahead, pop up. Doesn't work so great. Even with weight off of them, I'm having a tough time. I need the elbow, go ahead, or, go ahead, even a little bit lower, go ahead. Maximize my leverage. All the way down to the wrist, I think is too much. It's a little hard. But right about here to here, I can pull that arm in pretty easy. Another thing to mention, technically, I can tilt on either side. If my training partner, when he felt this grip, decided he was going to open his chest up to me, face this direction, I would no longer try to tilt him on this side. If I do that, he'll face me. Go ahead, start facing me and possibly recover guard. So I'll respond to his tilt. If I start trying to take him this way and he violently turns the other way, I hop behind, and I could always tilt on the other side. Okay, just like so, throwing hooks in on my training partner. Okay, one last time with a little less explanation. Just going into the move. Okay, we use one of those 3 foot patterns to secure our inside hook. Either pinched knees around his knee, stepping on the Achilles tendon, or stepping through the legs, all right, to eventually take my training partner's back. Now we're going to take a little bit of a look at how I can off-balance my training partner in ways that get him to break knee-elbow connection. I'm going to take a little bit of a look at the tight waist. So my training partner's knees and elbows are relatively well connected. Like I mentioned, penetrating hands is usually pretty easy, okay? I usually don't have too much of a time, even as my training partner tightens up, penetrating hands across. So what we're going to look to do now is get a nice strong tight waist on my training partner. Now, it is exactly what it sounds like in terms of a tight waist. If you're getting a tight waist that is basically just like, a hand on your training partner's hip, it won't offer you as much control. Now, I will say the deeper the tight waist goes, the more committed you are to your training partner's body, and it makes it so it's easier and easier for your training partner to trap a limb, go ahead, and roll you through, right? Like I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about this, later on, and, the vulnerabilities there and kind of what we can do in response, whenever something like that happens. But nonetheless, we got to be a little bit careful. So, just know that your tight waist will be stronger the deeper the arm comes in, okay? However, you'll be more vulnerable in terms of his counters, okay? So if I get an elbow deep on my training partner's waist, it's very easy to move my training partner around, go ahead, go back, compared to just hand on the waist. It's a little bit more difficult, okay? But the commitment is severe. One thing I guess I would say is probably what makes the most sense is the more you line yourself, or the more deep the tight waist, the more you should probably line yourself up with your training partner in a parallel position where your hips are behind his hips. If I'm elbow deep here and my hips are behind his hips and he goes to try to do a roll, ahead, other way, right, like the Makikomi, right, I can kind of stay behind this guy. Go back. If I go super deep on the tight waist and I just hop over here and he wants to Makikomi now, it's almost impossible to get behind my training partner's hips. Okay? If I'm going to play things a little bit more fast and loose, and I want to be out here with my training partner, I'll use a little bit more of a hip grip, okay? Less of a tight waist, or maybe just hand across my training partner's midsection. So the name can be a bit of a misnomer sometimes, okay? Now, I'm going to knock my training partner down by moving away from him, okay? You do this in a couple different ways. One, I just move my hips out and away from my training partner and knock him down. Come back up. Sometimes I'll use a knee against my training partner's knee to place a wedge in place so he can't just open up his knees for base. Let's go back. If I just pull and he opens his knees, he can stop me that kazushi. Now, having said that, I can't knock him down, but if he opens his knee that much, right, we can just throw a foot on the inside. Okay, so there's a little bit of a dilemma happening here. Okay, but having said that, if I need a little help, maybe the elbow and knee are coming close and the knees are wide, right, but the elbow's right, he's just doing a good job blocking that off. Well, then I'll add a little bit of a knee inside his knee, and then I give that tug and knock him down. Now, here's where the magic happens. Let's rotate. Okay. From this position, I want that gap between knee and elbow, but the knee and elbow are still pretty close. And if I let my training partner get up naturally, go ahead, the knee and elbow stay pretty close. Okay. What I'm looking to do is to create a situation in off balance that gives me an opportunity to step on this foot. Okay? Creates an opportunity for, as my training partner is maneuvering his legs, I get to step here. Okay? Now, as my training partner gets up, it's harder for him to get that knee-elbow connection that he wants, and I can sneak a knee inside, or keep coming up. I might even be able to keep coming up to the knee. I might even be able to sneak a whole hook inside. So let's look at this again. I knock this guy down, and I'm hovering over his hips, okay? Now he starts popping up, and I just step on that Achilles. I can swing my hook completely in, or I can just get a knee inside and stay in this position. Now I can perform my tilts, okay? I can get a seatbelt and perform a tilt to here, or various forms of 2-on-1 and perform my tilts. Now that I've scored that Achilles tendon, okay? Why can't I just start with the foot on the Achilles tendon? You could. We've talked about this before. But when training partners are good in good defensive position, if you have an off balance them first, and he feels me stepping here, he's never going to let me get the Achilles tendon. So I rock him off balance first to create that disruption in the elbow connection and that scissoring effect. And that usually brings my training partner to his knees. Now notice, if I don't hold weight on his hips, the scissor that exposes the Achilles tendon doesn't really happen, okay? If with no weight, he can just rock back up to his knees and his feet stay pretty protected, okay? If I put weight on his hips, try to get up, he has to scissor, right? Go back. When he scissors the legs, that's when that Achilles becomes vulnerable and we're ready to put our hook in, or like I said, even if I failed, I put the hook in, he kind of still brings his knee in a little bit, right? No problem. Even just maintaining this position is great. There's still all of those tilts that we can do that will eventually get that hook in, okay? If the hook came in and we're in this position, same thing. You can do the tilt to open up your training partner's far side the same way that you would from those other grips. All right, and we'll eventually place that far hook in, okay? So once again, this is the idea that we're working with here. I'll do it on the other side. Instead of going hands locked in various positions, we have hands open, okay? And from here, I rock my training partner off balance, and I look to score that Achilles or calf muscle. Right now, I'm on his calf muscle. It's still pretty good, okay? Either hook follows all the way in, okay, or knee comes in front. If you want even more insurance, let's do this again. You want even more insurance, as I'm doing this, I can catch a wrist here. And now when he tries to close off that knee-elbow connection, it gets very difficult. Okay, I can catch that 2-on-1 pretty easy. Start working my way up to my training partner's back. Okay. Rock the opponent off balance, expose the Achilles tendon, and then perform your tilt. So we're going to take a look at a grip you guys are going to see in other applications throughout this DVD. My training partner's knees and elbows are on the floor. We're going to take a look at the claw, okay? Reaching underneath your training partner's arm and grabbing the back of the neck. This is, again, another grip as opposed to our seatbelt, our tight waist, okay? Hands locked behind that we can rely on to potentially control our training partner, okay? And eventually take the back. Now, what does the claw grip kind of offer us that, maybe some of these other grips don't, okay? The claw grip offers us a much bigger buffer of space between my training partner's knee and elbow than any other grips that I can think of, okay? If I lock my hands around in a chest lock, if he goes knee and elbow connection, let's turn sideways. If he goes knee and elbow connection, he can almost block off that space completely. So when we go tilting and moving our training partner around, and I try to put a foot on the inside, that blocked off space is hard to access because that elbow can always retract, okay? Even in some of our other methods where we kind of like put a knee on the inside, there's some space between the knee and the elbow, but it's not a lot of space, okay? Even when we're able to place that knee inside, okay? And certainly with a seatbelt, we don't do anything to reduce my training partner's knee-elbow connection, really, other than maybe some extension, which we'll learn about later. With the claw grip, my whole shoulder is between my training partner's elbow and knee. So when he goes to try to close off that space, he can do it, but it's never really closed off. As I move my training partner around the mat, there's a ton of space between knee and elbow now. He can't close it completely, okay? Goes to try to drive his elbow down, and my whole arm is in his way, okay? So what we're going to do this time, like I mentioned, pretty easy is get a hand inside and underneath my training partner, okay? Sometimes you may struggle, working on your grips. Whenever your training partner gets a hold of your wrist or something and makes things difficult, you can always move over to the other side, no problem, all right? When we go to increase the depth of the claw, you're going to utilize a principle that I often talk about in my teachings with submission holds in terms of penetrating the arm, okay? Whenever I go for a guillotine and I want to get a high wrist, my head and shoulders turn so that the wrist can get high, okay? If I want to go for a darce, head and shoulders turn so I can penetrate the arm. When my shoulders stay square, my arm can only reach here. As they turn and I look, the arm all of a sudden extends. Same thing is going to be true for the claw. If I just try to grab like this, it's not a very strong claw. That training partner moves around a little bit and all of a sudden it's gone. So what I do is I lean down towards this side. I turn my chest and shoulders almost looking up at the ceiling. And I sink this in by grabbing with my wrist. It's not my fingers that I want to control my training partner with. It's my wrist sunk into the side of my training partner's neck. Now, I'll take this hand, slide it inside my training partner's hip. This will act similarly to putting my knees behind my training partner's hips. Now, instead of having my knees behind, I have my training partner's hips stuck inside my chest with my wrist inside the hip, like so. So if he were to try to roll out towards this side, it would be difficult because I'm thigh prying my training partner in a way that makes it hard for the hips to get away. All right, and I can maneuver my training partner's hips around or follow him the same way that I would with my knee. Okay, what do I mean by that? If my training partner starts rolling around the mat, I always have this hand behind the hip to follow my training partner. Whereas normally, I'd have to do that job, not with this hand, but with this knee. As he rolls around the mat, I use my knees to follow my training partner. And at any given point in time, I could lose him with my knees, and I don't have anything. Okay, but when I have this claw and this thigh pry, it keeps a little bit of better control over my training partner. I know where his hips are, and I can feed to that position where my training partner's hips are all of a sudden between the knees, and I'm ready to throw hooks in. So, once again, countersink that grip, get that strong thigh pry so I can control my training partner's hips. Okay, and now from here, just start tilting. Okay, see if you can get this knee in front of your training partner's leg. If you have trouble, no problem. We could use our legs, our other leg. Start pulling that ankle apart, then get the knee inside. and incrementally work here. Okay, so even if I had nothing, his knees on as close to his chest as possible, there's still a pretty big gap here. I can get that knee in. I can step on the Achilles. But I can fight to get that hook. Again, when we're doing this tilt, we're looking for a quarter turn. I don't roll completely underneath my training partner. If he tries to force that, okay, he tries to push into me, hop over to the other side, I don't let it happen. I force this thigh pry down. Now from here, I dig my hips underneath. I get my hook. Okay? One other thing I'll say about this claw grip that's unique and interesting compared to other grips that you get when you take the back is when things don't go perfect, right? Let's say I lost a thigh pry or something like that and my training partner tries to face me. You always have a potential opportunity to hit katagatames on your training partner. Even if I had rolled my training partner completely through, I lost his hips, he starts scooting away, I can always follow up, all right, with strangleholds and things like that from this position. It's another thing that the claw grip offers you. That might be another reason why you might choose it, because you can have a follow-up submission. Unlike a lot of the other controls that we have, you can gain the ability to submit your training partner, right, through the use of that claw grip, okay? Okay, let's take a little bit of time to discuss a really important element of taking the back, which is getting the bottom hook first, okay? Now, this is relevant in conventional back taking when you're in a static position. This is relevant when you have combinations that you're working through to eventually take somebody's back. It's relevant in a scramble situation where, you know, you're jockeying for control over your training partner's back and there might be an opportunity for him to escape, you know, or get on top or whatever the case may be. This is very, very important. And I thought I would take a minute to talk to you guys about it, even though it's an element that you've seen repeatedly in other things that I've taught. I haven't placed enough emphasis on it to cement it in your brain. So hopefully this helps. My training partner's knees and elbows are down on the floor, okay? And regardless of how this happens, he doesn't have to be in turtle position. He can be elsewhere or whatever the case may be. We want to start thinking about always putting in the bottom hook first. Now, when my training partner is in a turtle position like this, there is no bottom hook, okay? There's a near hook and a far hook, okay? The far hook would be over my training partner's back like so. Near hook would be here like so, okay? So when my training partner's in turtle position, the bottom hook would be the near hook, okay? And that's what I would be referring to. When your training partner's in turtle position, sometimes you can get away with, you know, chasing a far hook. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. You're probably not going to get it. It's going to be difficult to do, okay? But it doesn't completely ruin, you know, whatever it is that you're going to do. But once you guys end up in a situation where your training partner has fallen to the mat, okay, like so, and you have no hooks, okay, right now, it becomes very, very important that the bottom hook comes in first or very quickly after the top hook, okay? What I can't do is place a hook in like so and spend long periods of time where I only have a top hook. If I ever do this, my training partner will start sliding his hips out, getting his hips to the mat, turning inside my arms, and he'll face me. Okay? Contrast that, open up your legs, with getting the bottom hook in first. Now, when I have this bottom hook in, even with just the bottom hook and no top hook, none of what we just referred to is going to happen. He can't slide his hips away, certainly not as easily as he did before. So we want to emphasize as much as possible getting this bottom hook in first. Or if that's not possible, okay, I can see a situation where we go top hook first, but you have to do one of two things, okay? Either immediately this second hook has to come in, okay? Or I have to turn my top hook into a bottom hook. The more time I spend here, the more chance he has to escape. So I place that top hook in, and then I pull my training partner to the opposite side. Now, there's a leg underneath my training partner that when he tries to work his shoulders towards the floor, he can't get out, okay? Or at least not as easily. Of course, if you peel off the hook, he'll find a way, okay? But I want an impediment between my training partner and the floor. And right now, that's my leg, okay? If this leg is here and this leg is here, he always has the ability to slide out. Go ahead, okay? So it stands to reason that no matter what grips I have on my training partner, because I just worked with a seatbelt, okay? I could have a claw, I could have a chest lock on my training partner, okay? Tight waist, however you want to look at it. Control my training partner's shoulders, it really doesn't make too much of a difference. But as we're down on the mat, okay? If we're in this position, either very quickly get this foot in first, okay? However you might do that. We've talked about a couple different strategies, okay? Or if we go top hook, just quickly pull your training partner to the other side. This is very, very important. If your training partner discards that bottom hook, and then you have the opportunity to put the top hook in, okay, no problem. We make it the bottom hook again, okay? You might even have a little bit more success by taking the hook and not just leaving it dangling between the legs where it can get swatted away. Go ahead, use your second foot, swatted away, throwing it completely across the waist. This feeds into, body locks and all different sorts of things, but it kind of protects against his ability to walk out even further, okay? But that bottom hook is super, super important. That's the most important thing that we're doing here. So you can do this as a drill, or you can just focus on it as a technical concept in your jiu-jitsu. I could have my training partner go to turtle. Okay, he can go to roll into a particular position, all right? And now we end up side on. Okay, I either get this bottom hook in first, okay? Or if it's not possible, top hook becomes the bottom hook. Okay, now we're safe. He goes to try to scoot out. Even with no hands, I can maintain control over my training partner with a figure four here. His only escape when I have a bottom hook would be to turn it into a top hook. Go ahead. Or, go back, to remove it completely. And whenever that happens, it either has to come back in very quickly, or I've got to get my training partner towards the side of the top hook. Okay? This is a really, really important back-taking principle that you guys should all be following. And it might very well be the reason why you lose control over people more often than you should. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at an unconventional but very successful approach at taking the back from turtle position. It's actually kind of transitory. This can take place somewhere in an intermediary position between turtle position as well as 4-point. I typically don't like doing this from full 4-point, but somewhere between the two, whenever my training partner perhaps goes to try to get up or try to stand up on me or whatever the case may be, is usually when I use this most, or just in transition as we're moving around the mat. You'll see various opportunities for this potentially. Now, if I want to set myself up for this, one of the things that I typically tend to do is I tend to stay relatively behind my training partner's hips, and I put my hands inside my training partner's thighs. I do this to keep some forward pressure on my training partner to make it a little bit more difficult for my training partner to stand, so I can kind of slow that process out. Or slow that process down. I don't know what the hell I just said there. But as I'm sure he slow that process out, it makes no sense. As he goes to stand up here, if his head and shoulders come upright too quickly, right? If he uses this type of a stand-up, I'm going to have a tough time hitting this move that I want. Basically, what I want to do is jump right to a figure four on my training partner instead of having to worry about trying to put hooks in one at a time. In some competitions, this won't score you any points, but in a lot of no-gi competitions, it will. Even if it doesn't score you points, at the very least, you're ready to strangle your training partner. Okay, so I start things off with hands behind and prying my training partner forward at the thighs. Okay, this makes it so that if he wants to spring up, go ahead, it's difficult to do. Okay, and what he ends up doing when he goes to try to spring up is he ends up opening up a much bigger gap between his knees and his elbows. Okay, here, if I hang out behind my training partner and he springs up with the shoulders now, all right, there's no real gap there. And if I were to try to jump on my training partner's back, it's a little bit dangerous. I can fall off pretty easy because my training partner's tall. There's nothing to catch my weight. Okay, let's go back down. So when I keep my training partner here and he goes to try to build himself up, all I look to do is pass one arm across my training partner's midsection and catch my shin like so. As I do this, you're usually going to see me reach towards the mat. So inside the thighs, catch, reach towards the mat. I reach towards the mat so I don't fall completely down. Like so, as I'm doing this, okay? So I have hands in, One hand reaches for the mat, other hand reaches to catch the leg. And now from here, I open the knee and lock my figure of 4 like so across my training partner. On some opponents, you'll find this to be difficult because of their body size, okay, just like a regular figure 4, but specifically this transition, all right? There's nothing I can really do about that, okay? You're just going to have to do the best you can to gauge your training partner's size relative to your leg length and determine whether or not this is a good idea to try on your opponent. If you miss it, it's not the end of the world. It's not like you still don't have some control over your training partner. Maybe I couldn't pass this leg across. Maybe he gets a hand in front, whatever the case may be. It's okay. Then you can move into things like claw grips or whatever the case may be as you start to fall, okay, and kind of compensate for what's happening here, okay? But in an ideal world, I get my head a little bit over my training partner, I catch, post, and lock. And then from this position, I have a figure 4 on my training partner already. If you're not satisfied with the situation that you're in and you want him to be belly up, most people won't stay here because there's opportunity to strangle, you know, they'll go down to their elbows, etc. Elbows, right? But if you want to get yourself out of this position and stop trying to dig for strangles here, you can always use your power half to start turning your training partner's belly up, okay, towards the ceiling. Once again, I kind of use this movement in transition. There are other ways to hit it. I don't have to start with those 2 hands behind. I could be kind of side right on my training partner. I could maybe even be in a claw grip situation. And my training partner could go to try to get up, and I can use it right from here. The procedure is pretty much the same. So anything where you're hanging some weight over your training partner so that they can't go completely vertical. Even if I was using 2 hands behind the shoulders, it's not terrible. It doesn't put me in the same position. I want to be a little bit lower towards my training partner's hips typically, but you could probably pull it off. Just take your first initial step and then quickly feed this hand to this shin, and then we can go right into attacks on my training partner. And we already have our legs locked in that figure 4. It's a difficult position to defeat, okay? And you can often hold the figure 4 for much longer than you would if you just had 2 hooks in on your training partner, okay? We'll do this with, you know, kind of the claw grip now. So I have like that thigh prod. I put my head over my training partner's head, and I notice an opportunity. I just quickly place my knee over my training partner's hip and catch. That's another part of this that helps you balance weight on your training partner that I failed to mention, is my far knee coming across my training partner's hip will allow me to balance weight a little bit easier, okay? The hand post helps, but also this knee on the hip. If, for example, I didn't put this knee across the hip right away and I grab my ankle, I start to fall, even with the hand. All right, so another big thing for you guys will be knee over hip, like so. Now I'm like kind of attached to my training partner, both knees across his hips. Now at any given point in time, I can balance even without a hand. Okay, but that hand's there just in case. Now I can lock up my figure 4. Okay, to look at that slightly different angle. Okay, back down to the elbows. Okay, whether we're here, any of these riding positions where I'm putting a little bit of weight forward and I want to transition, I go knee over hip, catch the ankle, and post a hand on the floor. And from here, I can start jumping right into figure 4 positions on my training partner's back as we begin transitions out of turtle position to get an even more secure look at my training partner's back than what I would normally do with 2 hooks in. All right, so one of the unique ways I can attack my training partner goes into on his knees and his elbows. This isn't the only place to hit it, but most of the time this is where we're going to be at. It's getting into crucifix situations. Now, this can come off of some of our go behinds, where we get our knee behind our training partner, but basically the strategy being here that I control my training partner's 2 arms instead of immediately going for trying to get 2 hooks in on my training partner. We'll discuss later on how we can use this to counter our training partner's maki-komi rolls as well, but for the time being, we'll just do this relatively proactively. My knee is going to get behind my training partner's elbow like so, and my thumb will go inside my training partner's forearm. From here, I can step cleanly in and behind my training partner, or in front of my training partner's forearm, and I can control my training partner's arm in the crucifix. Now, there's a couple different ways that I could go about getting to a more controlling position than just being on top of my training partner. One is to just tilt my training partner out in this direction, and now I have my crucifix. All right, control both my training partner's arm. Another way to go about doing this is to hop over my training partner. So I get into my training partner's arms, and then I perform a forward roll over my training partner like so. You can get a seatbelt with your crucifix, or you can choose to control just your training partner with like a Kimura grip, like so. Okay? Both of these are acceptable. Okay? Sometimes it may be difficult to cleanly step completely over your training partner's arm in a meaningful way where you can trap it. That's okay. All you need is your heel on top of the forearm. Okay? You can get a heel on top of the forearm. As you roll, you'll extend your training partner's arm with your legs, and you'll find yourself in this position. Okay? Another common way you'll end up in crucifix situations is when you're going after Kimura. I just fall to your hip. When you're going after Kimura and you land in T-Kimura situation, there'll be times when you go to try, training partner tries to turn towards you, and you can step over your training partner's shoulder. Okay, and you'll often access crucifix situations from here as well. Okay, for the most part, most of your crucifix work will be done when you guys are in turtle situation. Now, once I get to that position, just lay there. Let's have you, keep facing. Once we get to this position, we want to start thinking about how we can get to the back. Okay, yes, there are other submission opportunities that I can hit from here. There's things like side triangles or back triangles and things that I can move to. Again, our goal is to get positions on our training partner's back. Technically, I do have control over my training partner's back to some degree. It's actually kind of surprising that a position like this isn't scored in our sport because it's very similar control, opens up access to submission holds, etc. But you have to draw the line somewhere. But we can get those two hooks in and start scoring the way that we're looking to pretty easily from positions like this. All we really got to do is start opening our hips up towards the ceiling and creating situations where my training partner there's pressure on my training partner's arm. Now, the best way to do this is to cross face my training partner first, whether it be with just a seatbelt, that's okay, but even better is to drop your knees so they can see it, okay? Is to grab my training partner's tricep while I cross face like so. All right, this makes it harder for my training partner to put his elbow in a position where it's not getting broken. So as I step over my training partner's forearm, I've put his elbow in the pocket of my hip, and I start opening my hips towards the ceiling. He feels the pressure and feels the need to drive in. If I don't cross face and I'm just kind of hugging here, my training partner's arm can stay somewhat relaxed in these positions. It's harder to apply pressure. When I get him to look away from it, it's much more severe. Now from here, my knees come underneath my training partner's hips, and my legs come in to control. So look at this from the other side. Knees flat for the time being, just so they can see everything. Okay? We'd love to be in this seatbelt situation instead of just controlling the Kimura, because like I said, we'll be able to put more torque on my training partner's arm. So we can cross face and grab my training partner's far elbow from here, and then I start walking my shin down towards the top of the forearm, and I really want his elbow to find its place in the bone of my hip. Now from here, knee starts to face towards the ceiling, hip starts to face towards the ceiling. He feels pressure on his arm. You could potentially sub him from here, but most people will alleviate the pressure by lifting their hips up. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll get an arm trapped when you take your training partner's back in here. It's always very important for us to be able to develop a procedure where we move from this crucifix to the back because the opportunity is going to be there many, many times, especially because of the Makikomi roll, which we'll see at a later point.